Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for joining. My name is Darren Campbell. I'm a software architect here at Zebra Technologies. I also do a lot of the developer relations work. And one of the big questions we've had recently with the imminent transition to Android 11 has been to understand scope storage, what it means for your application, what you can do about scope storage. I don't want to say how you can circumvent scope storage because, spoiler alert, there isn't really a way to circumvent it. But in this presentation, I'm going to try and go through in a bit more detail, maybe a deeper dive, as it were, into scope storage and enterprise persistence, and what we, Zebra, are doing to address some of the concerns around scope storage. And let's just get into it. Just to make everyone on the same page, we'll briefly cover what scope storage is, Google recommendations, and then some of the Zebra-specific recommendations, particularly if we get to it at the end, configuration around our own ZVA, Zebra Value Adds, as we call them, like different ways to configure those, how that's going to work moving forward, because obviously we're not exempt, just like you're not exempt from scope storage. So obviously we'd all like to pull with the same, I don't know what the metaphor is, but there's a metaphor where we're all in the same boat together and rowing with the same oar. Anyway, scope storage is a change which was, I don't want, it's not recently been introduced by Google. It was introduced in Android 10, and the idea is, well, it comes on the supposition that external storage was inherently insecure, in that any application can read any other application's files as long as they were on external storage, as long as they were granted the appropriate permissions, that read and write external storage runtime permission. You don't really want files accessing all of those different directories. And so scope storage was introduced to essentially the logic where an application could only access its own files on internal storage, you extend that to external storage. So now, with scope storage in place, what we're talking about is an application can only access its own files in external storage and in internal storage. That's where the scoped aspect of it comes from. You are on external storage, you are only scoped to your own files. And like there are a number of use cases, particularly around sharing of media. You want to share a picture that you've taken with your camera and you want to give that to an application, you want to read that picture in your application. So those use cases were handled with like various APIs which Google either introduced or they had already, like the media API. We'll get into some of these, storage access file picker. We'll get into some of those, but essentially that's the problem we're dealing with here. Whereas previously, a application could, for example, read its own configuration file that has been deployed to a world writable location through an EMM, for example. I covered this earlier on in my EMM presentation. You can read that configuration file, no problem, outside of scope storage, but with scope storage, how do you communicate with the EMM? How do you write a log file so that log file can be consumed by some other application which is handling all of the different log files on the device and sharing them with a server? How do you, even if it's a log file that you're writing to external storage so that someone can just plug your phone into your device into a computer and read it off, you might have a very large database that you are deploying, maybe offline if it's sufficiently large, or it's through an SD card. I don't know. All of these kind of enterprise use cases are challenged with scope storage, and so what can you do? Now, I mentioned that scope storage was introduced in Android 10 by Google, and that was true. You know, all applications running on Android 10 were subject, or targeting Android 10 were subject to scope storage. However, you could specify a flag in the Android manifest, which is request legacy external storage equals true. And if you did that, then hey presto, you no longer have to worry about scope storage. And every developer that I was aware of just set this flag and like kicked the can down the proverbial road, as it were. And but now with Android 11, this flag no longer has any effect. In fact, I've got this on a subsequent chart here. just to try and convey whether or not your application is subject to scope storage. So you need to target API 30 or higher. Actually, no, let me get this right. With the sorry, this is why I put it in a table, because there's all sorts of variables that mean. So let me just go down the yes. So your app will be subject to scope storage if you're targeting Android 10, that's API level 29, and you have not specified that flag that I said on the previous slide. So that's the first yes there. With Android 11, okay, if you're targeting Android 11, which is API 30, and you're running on an Android 11 device, then whether or not you set request legacy external storage, that flag, it doesn't matter. You will be subject to external storage. So that's why people are now becoming more aware of this, because they want to deploy to the Play Store, so they're targeting API level 30, and they're going to run on Android 11. Oh no, I'm subject to scope storage. If you are targeting API level 30 and you're still running on Android 10, then if your application previously specified the flag, it will continue to specify the flag. You're not subject to scope storage. But if you have not specified the flag, or you have specified it to be false, then you are subject to scope storage. So hopefully my talking didn't distract from the table, which I think is a lot more clearer than me trying to explain it there. So just in final summary of what is scope storage. So just understand that we, Zebra, are not offering a direct alternative to scope storage. So I've underlined it because we are offering alternative solutions, but just nothing direct to scope storage. Nothing like there's no get out of scope storage flag, for example. So that's why we're not offering anything direct like that. So developers, by and large, will need to work within the constraints of the changes made by Google. Some developers may be able to take advantage of a new Zebra proprietary feature, which I'll get into, called Secure Storage Manager, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of a demo about that as well. SSM can also persist across an enterprise reset, which is a very common use case for our developers, customers. Some developers may be able to take advantage of managed external storage. I'll get into that. There's a little bit more complexities around that when we get there. So let's look at what some of the Google recommendations are for scope storage. So these are what you'll find if you just go through Google's documents. So I won't dwell on these too much, but sometimes it's good to have the images just to give just so everyone understands what we're talking about. So first of all, Secure Access Framework enables you to share files with other applications using standard Android API content provider, and there's a tutorial about that. What you do is you share the file by having a file picker, and that's the important differentiation here. In order to it enables you to share any file, but you need to have the user interact with the device. So if you're fine with that, then Storage Access Framework is a very sensible way to go. If you want to manage your applications remotely, like I'll keep coming back to that, configuring applications with a config file, you want that to happen automatically, because you don't want to rely on the user. I mean, you might have thousands of devices as well. You don't want to rely on them manually loading in, like, you don't want it touching the device. So this exists if you're happy for the user to manually find the file themselves. Obviously, can be error prone if the user doesn't know what file they're looking for, or it adds to a setup and provisioning effort. The other dedicated solution which Google would recommend is if you are sharing media between applications, then you can do so with the media API. I think it's called the media API. There was a it's been updated. There was like an old media API and it's deprecated, I think, or aspects of it are deprecated. Anyway, there is an API that enables you to share media in a way that's compliant with scope storage, but the media has to be stored in its particular directory. So we've got the images, videos, and audio files. I think they're individual directories. The MIME type of the file is interrogated to determine which media file it belongs in. So you can't be clever and rename your database from .db or .sqlite or whatever to .jpeg, that's not going to work. It's just going to, not going to work with the APIs. So just bear in mind the downloaded files is a bit of a, I'll get into this a little bit later on, but there's some, you read different things online about the downloaded files directory. This is where I come to talk about those deprecated APIs, the media store API. I've got more information actually elsewhere. I've done a separate blog on this topic, referenced at the end. But if you are using the latest APIs, then you cannot see other applications files in the downloaded files directory. So there's some FUD online, disinformation online about using downloads. It's not reliable to use the downloaded files folder. And the other thing you can do, if you are developing both applications yourself, or you want other applications to consume your files, you would consider using a file provider. It's a standard Android mechanism built on top of the content provider. In fact, it's what Zebra are doing for our secure file sharing mechanism as well, based on SSM. But yeah, it's there. It's available to you. Use an Android provider to share your file from one application to the other. The other suggestion, I keep banging on about the config file. Like I said in my EMM presentation, using managed configurations is the recommended way to go in preference to a config file, particularly if your application is going to be managed by an EMM, which increasingly more and more applications are, as we see like a proliferation of EMMs in the field, of particularly low-cost EMM solutions. They're becoming more popular with small to medium businesses, whereas previously they were only really popular with larger businesses. But yeah, use of managed configurations, won't go into them anymore here, but it just allows you to configure your app in a way that doesn't rely on loading in a config file. And then also from Google, there are a couple of manifest options. So I covered earlier on the request legacy external storage flag. You can continue to use this flag. This is the flag that was introduced in Android 10, API level 29. And if you continue to target API level 29, as I showed in that table earlier on, your application will still not be subject to scope storage. Just remember, you can't post any applications to the Play Store without targeting anything like API level 30 or higher. So this isn't a solution for you if you're targeting the Play Store. Preserve legacy external storage. I've seen some people say, hey, this looks good, I'm going to use this to bypass scope storage. Its primary, its only use is if you have an application on an Android 10 device and the device is updated to Android 11, how does that the application was previously not subject to scope storage, and now it's running on Android 11 and it is subject to scope storage? What does it do? Well, the way that preserved legacy external storage works is that application will still not be subject to scope storage if the device itself is upgraded from Android 10 to Android 11. But just bear in mind that as soon as the application is uninstalled and then reinstalled, the preserve legacy external storage flag no longer has any effect. The application will be subject to scope storage after the application is reinstalled. The key word in that flag there is preserve. You're preserving it, but once it's uninstalled, it's no longer preserved. And then finally, there's a manifest option from Google, and you can specify, but I'm just looking at what's coming up in my subsequent slides. So I want to dwell on this a little bit because things get a little bit, again, disinformation I see out there on the internet. So there's a permission flag that you can declare in your manifest with manage external storage. And if your application is granted manage external storage, you will also see this called all files access permission, then your application is not subject to scope storage. So it has the same ability to read and write files as it had before scope storage was even a thing. Actually getting your application granted manage external storage permission is another story. There's a number of ways to do that. there is in the settings screen of the application, like in a consumer scenario, if I was telling you how to do this for a consumer app, I would say you would need to advise your user to go into the special access settings. And I think there's a way to invoke this directly by firing an intent from within your app and have the user manually grant you that special access. And after they have manually granted that to you, you have access to the manage external storage permission. Obviously, that does not scale. Particularly, you don't want the end user doing this kind of stuff. And so in OEM config and Stage Now, as part of our MX capabilities, we, Zebra, have the ability to pre-grant the manage external storage permission to a specific application. So you can define the I think it's the package name, as it's the signature you have to give as well of the application that's going to have this permission. And after you've defined that in the access manager, then the application will be granted. That will work. Just the complexity, though, is that if you are posting your application to the Play Store and you have requested manage external storage, then that's going to flag one of Google's automated checks when you try and upload your application. And Google are requiring that your application needs to meet a set of predefined, or one of a set of predefined use cases in order to be accepted within the Play Store. And things get a little bit more complicated additionally when we start talking about the managed Play Store. Like, it's different posting your application to a specific organization as a managed app versus posting your application publicly in the Play Store so that it can be consumed by a administrator as part of their managed Play Store that they're curating for their own organization. And so I've tried to remove some of this ambiguity on the slide here. So from what I understand in sort of conversations with Google and reading forums and everything, so public applications, that if you are posting your application publicly to the Play Store, then you can only use the manage external storage permission if you comply with Google's stated use cases. Stated use cases, for example, is you need to be a file browsing app, or I can't remember the others off the top of my head, but essentially you need to have a good reason to access all of the files on the device. So publicly, you need to comply with these use cases. Privately, if you are deploying an application to a specific organization, and so the use case here is I am an internal developer for a big retailer, for example, and I want to deploy my one application to my single end user, which is going to be it's a line of business app. It's made for a particular customer. I'm going to deploy that application through as a private app to a specific organization. Then the feedback I've received from Google is that you can, in that instance, make use of manage external storage, and you will not be subject to Play Store policy for all files access for manage external storage, as long as it's a private application deployed to a single application through as long as it's a private application deployed to a single organization. There's a bit of a gray area where nothing really is documented. And when you watch this presentation, maybe it will be in like a few months' time, but at the moment it is a gray area. If I develop an application and deploy it to multiple organizations, plural, that single organization deployment, that's a private app, that's fine, that's not subject to Play Store policy. If I deploy it to multiple organizations, then it would probably work because the logic is it's the same as this private application. If I get my with my highlighter here, laser pointer. So yeah, the way you do this, isn't it? Is you define the list of organizations. This is just one organization in the list. If I have multiple organizations in the list, then it's more of an honor system at this point, and I'm saying it's not good practice to use manage external storage if you are deploying to multiple organizations. And I'll say that again. I would not recommend using manage external storage if you are deploying to more than one organization. even though it would probably work today, there's no guarantee it will continue to work in the future based on what I've received from Google in terms of like email exchange and everything. So hopefully that clears up some of the ambiguity around manage external storage. Certainly, if you're not using the Play Store, then it would work. It's very easy for you, in fact, because you can just enable it in Stage Now if you're not using an EMM, or however else you're going to enable it with MX. You can just pre-grant permission, request it in your app. It all works fine and dandy. But more of our customers are moving towards the Play Store, so you just need to dig a little bit deeper into like Play Store policies when that comes into effect. Let me just spend the rest of this presentation talking about alternatives and recommendations on Zebra devices. So first of all, brief note, we have an enterprise folder. The folder exists on all of our mobile devices. It can be used for offline storage, and it persists across an enterprise reset. I would say, though, to use it with caution. It's not inherently secure, just the same as the old external storage on devices wasn't inherently secure. There's no change with enterprise folder here. So make sure you have other lockdown mechanisms in place on your device. Obviously, disable USB, disable settings that the user can get to, all of that. I think we've got a talk coming up or already happened from Ian on locking down your device. It does circumvent scope storage, but again, I would use it with caution because of all of the other reasons that I mentioned. We are releasing a new feature with Android 11, so you can play with this today. In fact, it's available. Let me just go out to my instance of Chrome that I've got running somewhere here, and if you go to techdocs.zebra.com, make the font look a bit bigger so you can see it, and then under Secure Storage Manager here, Solutions, then you'll see some documentation around the using Secure Storage Manager. What it is a method for storing and sharing name value pairs, key value pairs, and they can also be persisted across an enterprise reset. So this diagram I took from one of the engineering slides here, but you can imagine you have two applications, and I'm going to share data from one app to the other. It is just a string data. It's not like a file that I can share at this point. We are looking into file sharing using SSM. I mentioned file sharing with SSM in my EMM talk, actually, for the EMM kind of use cases. But for here, in fact, rather than just talk over a slide, let me show you. I have been working on a demo of the feature myself, and I've got this running on a TC52AX. So hopefully this is going to run. I was panicking a little bit because I've just come back from 2 weeks of PTO, and I ran this morning and it didn't work. But it did. I managed to fix it. I needed to clean build my applications. I think I'd done something funny yesterday. Anyway, you don't want to hear about my trouble. This is obviously an Android device. I have the same application here, just compiled with two different product flavors. What I want to point out, in fact, if I just launch application A on the device, here we are. So I need to define, I'm going to share some data from application instance A to application instance B. They've got different package names. They're installed as separate apps on the device. So I need to define the package name of myself as well as the package name of the app I'll be sharing it to. So sample A, sample B, and the signature. Now, the signature is the public certificate of the thing. I can't remember the word. Whatever you use to sign your application, it's the public certificate of that. There's a number of ways to get that. I did a article about it. So if you look at the developer portal or just my website, I've got it linked at the end of this deck, actually, just to determine that signature. You can do it in code, obviously. In this app, I'm finding out in code. And I'm going to share a key. I need to give that key a name. So let's just call this key key D. I don't know. I could have just kept it called key, couldn't I? And let's just share the value data1. And I am going to share this data with the B sample, SSM sample B. So if I just scroll up here, notice that at the moment there are no records found. I'm going to insert this into, it's like a shared database which is being used securely. And what this does, and you see it says inserted item at 2, that's because this data item has been shared with two applications. It's been shared with whatever I've defined at the top here, it's shared with myself so I can read it. And then if I go down to query, here I found one entry, and that's key D with data 1. And I've also shared this, this piece of data with package 2. So if I go out into SSM sample B, then this is, like I said, there's different flavors of the same. I just did this to make the code easier, but you can imagine these are two different applications. I've made it different colors to try and convey that. And then if I query here, I also get the same piece of data, so key D, data 1. What I can then do, I can go back to my original application. I can change this data to data 2. And then if I hit update, that's going to update both those records. And then when I query from here, see this has changed to data 2. And I query from here, this has changed to data 2 as well. Ooh, the demo worked. There we go. Brilliant. So the team are working on additional features. In fact, I'll get into those additional features in subsequent slides. But the other thing I want to mention is what I could have done is hit this persist across enterprise reset flag. That will change one of the attributes that I pass in when I store the data. And then when I do a enterprise reset of the device, which that will preserve that data item across reset. So when the device comes back on, I reinstall the application. It's got the same signature. It will have the same signature unless you've used a different one. Then you can query and get that piece of data again. Key 1P. Okay, so yeah, we go. So that was me, completely forgotten, but obviously that was me in a previous iteration. I had previously saved this as a persistent data item, key 1P. So that was me worrying that something had gone wrong, but no, it had gone very right, just in an unexpected way. So let's go back to the demo. Let's go back to the slide, sorry. So that was Secure Storage Manager, the initial release as it stands today. There are additional things that's happening in the future. So like I said, there is currently a way to share a file from Stage Now, or from, yeah, I think from Stage Now. Like I'm showing it on the right hand screen here. This enables you to deploy a file, or from an EMM, actually. An EMM can use this to deploy a file from themselves to another application. We're working on a way of exchanging a file from one app to another app, just in a more general sense. End-to-end encryption of managed configuration. So on the administrator panel, if you want to enter, for example, the Wi-Fi password as a managed config, at the moment that needs to be done in plain text. Just that's not a Zebra limitation, that's an Android limitation, Google limitation. So we're working on a way for you to encrypt that data at the point of entry, and then it's not decrypted until it's on the device. More information available in time. And then other encryption options to encrypt the values when they're stored within Secure Storage Manager, and whether or not they're decrypted. It involves like creating a key and encrypting that key and passing that key into the database. But we're still working on that as far as I can tell. I tried it and it didn't work, so I'm going to say it's still under development. So that's Secure Storage Manager. Let me just look at the time here. Yeah, I'm coming up to time, so I'll go through these next slides a little bit quicker. We have a number of our Zebra value adds, and we now need many of our Zebra value adds are currently using external storage to configure themselves. So what are we going to do in scope storage? So let me just go over briefly what we're doing here. So with Enterprise Home Screen, and I apologize, some of these screenshots are a little bit old, but I just took it from the documentation. You can still export the configuration as you did previously there's a UI option, and you can extract that file using ADB from Enterprise User, or you can use ADB to extract files from that. That's the scope storage of, is that the internal storage? Yeah, that's the internal storage. So the exported file is stored in internal storage, and you can copy that off still with Enterprise Home Screen. You can still, to configure EHS, push the file with ADB to Enterprise User. You can push the file to app internal storage, same locations on the previous slide, or you can use File Manager via Stage Now or OEM config. That's this I covered this in more detail in my EMM slide talk, so I won't go into it more here, but you can also use file manager through OEM config or stage now to deploy a file in a secure manner to EHS that's compliant with scope storage. And I said to come, that will be in a soon to be released version of EHS. Enterprise keyboard. So fixed layouts, like the layouts you're seeing here, numbers, letters, symbols, no change. That configuration is done through, I said through CSP, it's through MX or OEM config. Custom layouts, we're saying it's not applicable. You use a custom tool to generate those layouts. I did a webinar on this a little while back, and you can use ADB to install those custom layouts as well. Importing, so for fixed layouts, again, no change. There is an EKB MX feature that you can use. For custom layouts, again, no change. You can use ADB to copy those to the device after they have been exported by the keyboard designer tool. In future, similar with EHS, we will be moving towards that file manager to copy the config files in a scope storage compliant manner that doesn't involve ADB. Device Central, this is only really touched by the need to deploy a firmware update to the device. So you send what am I trying to say? The Device Central firmware UI, you select the file from the UI, and you can do that if you've copied the file into applications internal storage with ADB, or you can actually use the download folder. Covered that earlier on, but in this case, this is like the recommended way of finding that location. The old location can't be used because it was, I think it's probably the root of the SD card, so due to scope storage, it's no longer available. But it is still possible to select the file from, like I said, the internal storage if you've copied through ADB. Import and export. In fact, sorry, let me just clarify. It's not required to use ADB because you can still use that download folder, which is accessible outside of ADB. Enterprise browser is another one of our Zebra value adds. So no change in Android 11 in terms of import and export. The current method involves copying files using ADB, or there is a desktop tool you can use on Windows, which will, behind the scenes, use ADB to copy the files over. So again, no change there. You can use /enterprise for mass deployment. Again, no change. But just bear in mind, for EB, there are a multitude of configuration files. There's not just the config XML. There's shortcuts XML, custom scripts XML, tab bar XML, I think, as well. There's all sorts. So all of that, no change. If you need any more help on any of these features, then I would direct you to tech docs documentation for the individual products. And the other resource, which I didn't cover here, and whilst we've got a couple of minutes, actually, let me just show you how to go about finding this. So if you go to the, I'm going to put myself on the spot because I'm going to try and find something that might not be there anymore. There you go. So I did an article recently on scope storage with enterprise applications. So all of I said in this talk, and you can even see the table here, is covered in this documentation. So I recommend if anything here was a little bit fast, or if you've been fast forwarding the presentation, sort of skipping parts, and you missed something you just want to search, then it's all here. Please do take a look at the available options there. So hopefully that's given you, and it has addressed many of your questions. But that is the conclusion of what I was going to cover. So again, if there are questions, we can address this on the developer portal. There's a LinkedIn group, there's a Twitter group that you can post to, or there's also a GitHub repository, which I'm very active on. And if there's a particular issue that you have on any application on GitHub, you can just post an issue there, and it will probably make its way to either me or one of the developer relations team eventually. But other than that, thank you very much. I've been Darren Campbell, and thank you for listening.